Hi, my name is Kelly Waymont. Today we're going to make a 3D paper poppy. This was a viewer request and I think you'll find it's a pretty easy flower to make. For this 3D poppy, there are not a lot of tools and materials you need. We're going to use some cardstock, so red, green, and black cardstock. We'll use a 15 millimeter ball. So this can be a spun cotton ball, it can be a foam ball, it could even be a bead, but about 15 millimeters is the size you're looking for. And we will also use a piece of 18 gauge floral wire, and it's best if it's got green paper covering on it. We'll need a paintbrush, and you might want to use a ball shaping tool, but that's not essential. You're going to want a silhouette spatula tool, and we're going to use both white glue and a hot glue gun. We'll use a little bit of black acrylic paint and water in a little spray container. You can use any silhouette cutting machine for this project. You can go as small as a portrait, you can go as large as a Cameo Pro. You will need a sticky mat and a sharp cutting blade. Let's go into the software. All right, here in Silhouette Studio, let's go grab the design we're going to use for this 3D paper poppy. So if I just click the Store tab, it's going to open up the Silhouette Design Store. And the number we're looking for is 435640. And you can see that this 3D paper poppy shows up. So you can go ahead and purchase it, download it, whatever you need to. I have already got it purchased, and so it's in my Silhouette Studio library already. And you can find it in your recent downloads folder. Just double click the 3D paper poppy to open it. All right, so let's go ahead and we're just going to cut one color at a time. So we'll move the pieces off that we don't need. I'm going to start with the red petals, and so make sure I've got my machine. It's set up correctly for the Cameo 4. My cutting mat, I'm going to use the Cameo cutting mat. My media size, I'm going to switch to letter because I'm using letter size medium weight cardstock. And that's basically all we need to do on the design page. So we'll go to the Send tab. And let's make sure we've got the right machine connected. Okay, so now my auto blade's already in there, so it's just going to take a second to think that through. Okay, so it's got the auto blade. My material I want to set it up for, I'm going to just go ahead and go with cardstock textured heavy, and I'm going to just adjust it to a blade depth of 4, and all the other settings look about right. So I will get this cardstock loaded on my mat and go ahead and send to send it to the machine. All right, so here's my cutting mat, and I'm just going to take away the protective shield and save that for putting back on the sticky part once I'm done cutting. I'm just going to take my letter size paper and place it on my mat the same way it showed in the software, upper left corner, and then I can load it. And that's all ready, so I can click Send. All right, that's done cutting. I'll give a quick check to make sure that peels off easily, and it does. I'll unload it and just take my petals off the mat. It's always fine to curl your mat away from your paper to get those pieces of paper to pop off. And then I'll go ahead and I'm done with the red, so I'm going to switch to my green cardstock, and I'll put that on there, and I can go ahead and load this right now and then go back into the software to cut the leaf. All right, so back in the software, I'm going to go back to the design page and move those petals off to the side. Anything outside of the cutting area will not cut. It'll just ignore anything that's not on the virtual mat. So I know my green paper is big enough for that leaf, so I'll go back to the Send tab. And it's the same type of paper, so I can leave all the same settings and just click Send. All right, the green is done, and that looks like that cut well. Set that aside. And then the last piece to cut is the black. So I'm going to make sure that my strip of black paper goes across the top, so it'll work for those pieces that I'm going to have on my virtual mat. I'll get that loaded again. Okay, go back to the design page, move the leaf away, and move these black pieces up here. Now these are a little bit more skinny and detailed than anything else we've cut. So let me give you a few tips. We'll go to the Send tab. And some things you should know when you're trying to cut something with lots of sharp corners like this. You should definitely, especially if you're working with cardstock, you should be working with a sharp blade. Your mat should be quite sticky. It doesn't have to be brand new, but it should be fairly new. And it should also be clean, so it doesn't have a lot of debris on it from past cuts. And then, just to be safe, we can either do an overcut, which will lift the blade between the cuts, or we could do a second pass. So maybe if my blade was duller, I would do a second pass. I think for this, it'll probably be fine to do turn on the overcut. And so that will just take a little bit more time as it's lifting the blade, but that will help with the sharp corners so we get less tearing. So that is all set up, so I can hit Send. All right, that's done, so we'll unload that. So now those should release fairly easily. I'm going a little bit slower pulling these pieces off. I just don't want to lose any of these little arms of the design. And sometimes the spatula tool helps get these pieces off easier. So those look like they cut pretty well. And if you got a little bit of tearing, or if you lose an arm or so, that doesn't matter a lot for this because they're going to be layered and you just won't notice an individual piece like that. I'll put my shield back on my mat and set that aside for my next project. All right, so the order in which we're going to do this next phase of the assembly is a little bit important because you've got to have some dry time in between. So we're going to start with putting the ball onto the floral wire. So all you need to do is put some hot glue in the hole, and if you're using foam, you can just stick the tip of your hot glue gun in there or poke a hole first, but we'll just put that hot glue on there. And so that with hot glue will dry pretty quickly. The next thing we're going to do is paint this ball black. And you could do this with a Sharpie marker. I find it easy to just use black acrylic paint. And since it's just the one piece, I'm going to just put a little dab of black acrylic paint straight on the ball and then just spread it around with a paintbrush. You could also, if you Google images of poppies, you can see that sometimes it's black, sometimes it could be green, sometimes looks like there might be a little bit of purple. So you don't have to use black. You can look at your own flowers and see what you want it to look like. I'm just going to do black on black because it's really easy and it does give the feel of what a poppy looks like. Okay, so we'll let that dry for a minute. And the next thing we're going to do is to shape our petals. So we're going to use, because this is cardstock, I find that making the paper damp is a really good way to manipulate your cardstock. So I'm just going to use a little spray bottle of water and just give it a little couple spritzes. Make sure it's damp, and then we're going to kind of fold and twist it so the creases are a little bit vertical. And you can twist. You don't want to tear the paper, but you can. We're just crumpling and twisting. That's one of the nice things about poppies is that they kind of look like paper already. So we'll just give it some little twists, and then I'm going to open it back up and pinch the bottom together, make it a little tighter and pinch at the bottom, and then just kind of curl it up a little bit so it's got kind of a cupped shape, and that's all really easy to do while the paper is damp. So I'm going to do that with all the other petals. A little spritz of water. Once it's damp, just kind of fold and twist. And you can be pretty rough, but we don't want to tear it. When you unwrap it, kind of make sure it goes in kind of a cupping shape, curls upwards a little bit, and pinch at the base. And we'd rather have that base a little bit flat instead of really lumpy, because that's where we're going to be adding the hot glue at the end. All right, here's our last petal. You can see we don't want to stretch those creases back out, so we're just leaving it still a little bit rumpled. Pinch the base and give it a little bit of flat, and then have it in a little bit of a cupping shape. And so while those dry, we'll move on to the single leaf. Again, just a little spritz of water. And you could kind of crumple this also, but what I think looks good is just kind of fold it in half a little bit. And it's okay if it gets some crumples and creases, but I'm just bending out the leaf a little bit from the center. So it's got this main center fold and then curling out just a little bit from the center. All right, so we'll let that dry also. And now we'll just move on to these, the black centerpieces. So this should be dry. Our black ball should be dry. Wait till it is dry. We're going to take the smallest little piece, and I'm going to use my little spatula tool to kind of roll it along my thumb and curl them all the same direction, so it's a little bit of a cupping shape. And this is where I'll use white glue. You want a white tacky glue that dries fairly fast. You definitely want one that dries clear. So we'll just add a little bit of glue to the center, kind of along those little spikes. And then we're just going to place it right on the top of the black ball. So press it on first, and then with the white glue you should be able to move it a little bit. Now if any of those spikes kind of poke out, it's probably fine, but if you have a nice fine tip on your glue bottle, you can add more glue to any of those tips. But I've noticed on real poppies, if you look at pictures, they can kind of stand out away from the main ball, so that's fine too if they don't lay completely flat. And this is really just a detail piece. You're not going to see it unless you're looking closely of this black on black, but it is a nice little detail that you expect with poppies. All right, so now all of these other centerpieces, these are all going to just stack on top of each other. So we can do the same thing with the spatula tool to kind of roll it along your thumb, roll the paper between your thumb. The other thing you can do, if you have one of these ball shaping tools that are used for paper flowers and even for clay, it's just called a ball shaping tool. You can kind of roll it there, either on the palm of your hand or with a soft mat, and it just kind of gets the same effect. You just want all those to curl up towards the center. And we don't need the same amount of curl in all of them. It's fine if they are, it's fine if they're not. They're just going to stack together, and we don't want them to be completely identical. All right, so those are ready. And now we're just going to slide those up along the ball, or along the wire, to go to the base of the ball. So here you can use either hot glue or white glue. I think I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit of white glue. There's one. And the next one. And we want to make sure we're not stacking these exactly on top of each other. We want a little bit of one row to kind of go between the gaps of the previous row. Here's the third one. You can see that starts to look a little bit fluffy with the more layers we put on. And you're always welcome to cut more if you want more of an effect. And then here's our last one. With the glue, you don't want to use too much. You don't want it to get soggy, so be a little careful with how much glue you're using. All right, so we'll give that a good press. And there is our poppy center. And so now it's time to add the petals. And I'm going to go ahead and, if there's any that are a little bit narrower, I think those are what I'll use on my first row. We're going to use one row of 3 and put them in thirds, and then we'll use a second row for the other 3. So I'm going to get my glue gun. All right, so we're just going to add hot glue to the very tip. And just place it right on the underneath. Right there. It does not have to be on the wire stem itself. It can just be at the base and touching the wire. And then we'll do another petal. All right, so there's our first row of 3 petals, and now these other 3 petals are just going to go underneath and fill in the gap and split the difference between the petals that are already there. Same thing, just hot glue on the very tip. And place it just right in between 2 petals that are already there. And it's good if you can do it so you cover up any black from the underneath side. So there's 2 of our 3 on the second row. And you can see that's looking really good. Looks like a poppy. Here's our last petal. Got some glue strings there. All right, so I think we got that last one in the right place. So they don't have to be perfectly even. Don't worry if your flowers don't turn out the way absolutely symmetrical, because that's fine. They're not fully symmetrical in nature either. So there is our poppy. All we have to do now is add our leaf. And with the leaf, I'm just going to add a little bit of glue here and stick it straight on the stem. That's why I like to have a green paper covered stem. So it matches. And just a few inches below, several inches below the tip of the base of the flower, and then you can kind of curl it out or add the crease. You can go straight out, put some bends in the wire, and now you have your 3D paper poppy. I hope you've enjoyed this project. Make sure that you like and subscribe to this channel, and if you would like to see more projects, make sure that or certain types of flowers, make sure that you put those in the comments. Next time we'll be doing a sunflower, which is another viewer request, and we will see you next time.